立法會主席。
The President. Good morning. This is the first LegCo meeting of the Year of the Ox. I wish you all health and success in the new Lunar New Year. And I hope Hong Kong of the epidemic for the benefit of the people. Government bills, first reading. Appropriation Bill 2021. Arbitration Amendment Bill 2021. Employees Compensation Amendment Bill 2021. Road Traffic Amendment Bill 2021. Second reading. Financial Secretary. Mr. President, honorable members and fellow citizens, good morning. I move that the Appropriation Bill 2021 be read a second time. President, over the past year, we all experienced a very different life. The epidemic has aggravated the economic recession. Face masks have become a daily necessity. We might have spent more time at home, but we have fewer opportunities to gather with our relatives and friends. The year 2020 has become our common memory. The epidemic has made us realize that globalization is not only a driving force for economic development, but also the key to victory in the fight against viruses and epidemics. No place on earth can stay aloof and remain unaffected. Only with concerted efforts can we successfully beat this epidemic of the century that has plagued the entire world. Hong Kong's went through tribulations in the past 2 years. International political tensions have dampened local exports and market sentiments. Violent clashes have endangered the stability and safety of our society, and the epidemic has exerted additional pressure on the whole community and economy. In the past year, Hong Kong's economy recorded a negative growth of 6.1%, with the latest unemployment rate rising to 7%. The government of the Hong Kong SAR has committed a total of nearly $300 billion for supporting measures with a view to stabilizing the economy and relieving people's burden. However, this has also brought the fiscal deficit to a record high. With the epidemic still lingering, our economy is yet to come out of recession. Our most urgent task is to contain the epidemic and press ahead with the vaccination program so that people and businesses can be back on track, and safe traveling between Hong Kong and the mainland, as well as the rest of the world, can be resumed as soon as possible. I will, as always, provide the resources required to fully support the anti-epidemic work. This year's budget focuses on stabilizing the economy and relieving people's burden. It aims to alleviate the hardship and pressure caused by the economic downturn and the epidemic through the introduction of counter-cyclical measures costing over $120 billion, and seeks to create a leverage effect to benefit our people, workers, as well as enterprises. It's equally important that we should grasp the major directions and new trends of future development to strategically enhance our policy steering, support measures, and resources allocation in key areas. This will not only bring new impetus to our industries, but also enable them to have a more dynamic, diverse, and interactive development. I will go into more details in the ensuing paragraphs. Economic situation in 2020. Last year, the COVID-19 epidemic ravaged the world, causing unprecedented repercussions on the global economy. The International Monetary Fund estimated that the global economy contracted significantly by 3.5% for the year as a whole. At the onset of the outbreak, governments around the world implemented stringent social distancing requirements and widespread lockdowns, plunging many major economies into a deep recession in the first half of last year. Amid a sharp fall in external demand caused by the epidemic, Hong Kong's total exports of goods tumbled by 9.7% year-on-year in real terms in the first quarter of last year. Later, with a strong rebound in the mainland economy after its epidemic situation was kept under control and the gradual recovery of other major economies in the second half of the year, Hong Kong's total exports of goods resumed growth in the second half of the year, yet there was still a mild decrease of 0.3% for the year as a whole. Under the threat of the epidemic, inbound tourism was brought to a frozen state for most of the time last year amid extensive travel restrictions worldwide. Exports of travel services fell drastically by 90.5% for the year as a whole. Exports of financial services saw a moderate growth in the period, but total exports of services still registered a record decline of 36.8% for the year as a whole. Given the volatile local epidemic situation, social distancing measures were tightened from time to time. This, together with the weak job and income conditions, has dampened local consumer sentiments. Private consumption expenditure dropped significantly by 10.1% for the year as a whole, despite some narrowing of the decline in the second half of the year. Amid the highly uncertain business outlook, investment expenditure fell by 11.5%. Hong Kong's overall economy contracted substantially by 9% in the first half of last year. While a slight improvement was seen in the third quarter, it has been hit again by the epidemic since the latter part of the fourth quarter. For 2020 as a whole, the economy contracted by 6.1%, the largest annual decline on record. It is also the first time for Hong Kong to register 2 consecutive years of negative growth. The labor market deteriorated sharply. The seasonally adjusted unemployment rate went from 3.3% in the fourth quarter of 2019 to 7% in the latest period, the highest in close to 17 years. Amid the epidemic, the consumption and tourism-related sectors were hit hard. The unemployment rate of the retail, accommodation, and food services sectors combined rose to 11.3%. In particular, the unemployment rate of the food and beverage services sector reached a high level of 14.7%. The unemployment rate of the construction sector also reached a double-digit level. Household incomes fell markedly in the year. Amid a lackluster economy, pressures on consumer price inflation were modest. Netting out the effects of the government's one-off measures, the underlying inflation rate was 1.3% for last year as a whole, down 1.7% percentage point from the year before. As for the property market, the residential property market was generally stable last year. Prices of commercial and industrial properties fell visibly from their peak in 2019 and transaction volume dropped to a record low. Following the relaxation of macro-prudential measures for mortgage loans on non-residential properties by the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, as well as the abolition of the doubled ad valorem stamp duty on non-residential property transactions by the government, there was a slight rebound in transactions in the latter part of last year. Economic outlook for 2021 and medium-term outlook. With the launch of vaccination schemes in various parts around the world, the global economy may see relatively significant improvements starting from the latter half of 2021. Last month, the IMF forecast that the global economy will rebound by 5.5% this year. The mainland economy was hit hard by the epidemic in early 2020. Nevertheless, with the epidemic swiftly put under control and vigorous macro policies implemented in a timely manner, the mainland economy experienced a strong rebound since the second quarter with an annual growth of 2.3%, making our country the only major economy in the world that has achieved a positive growth. Looking ahead, though there are still uncertainties arising from the global epidemic situation and the China-US relations, the mainland economy is fundamentally sound. The Central Economic Work Conference held at the end of last year emphasized that the continuity, stability, and sustainability of the macro policies would be maintained to provide the necessary support for economic recovery on an ongoing basis. All these would be conducive to robust economic growth in the mainland. The U.S. economy has begun to pick up since the third quarter of last year, with the rollout of a vaccination program and the support of fiscal stimulus measures, as well as the easy monetary environment. Market forecasts generally point to faster economic growth in the U.S. this year. The economy in Europe has slowed down again since recently due to the resurgence of the epidemic. Nonetheless, with stronger policy support provided by the European Central Bank since late last year, the Eurozone economy is expected to rebound later this year, provided that vaccines are widely applied. Once the epidemic is contained, Japan and other economies in Asia will also see a visible recovery this year. Members, the foreign and economic policy directions of the U.S. administration is the attention of the whole world. Their implications on China-U.S. relations and the economies are of particular significance. The global community hopes that China-U.S. economic and trade relations can gradually be back to normal, thereby supporting further revival of global trade and business activities. However, as seen from the developments in the past few years, there remain many deep-seated conflicts between the two nations. Looking ahead, relations between the two nations will remain in the state of continued tension and ongoing competition, but without a total breakdown. Changes in China-U.S. relations will attract the global trade, finance, and political landscape. External factors such as geopolitical situations and possible financial risks associated with the surging global public debts also warrant attention. Hong Kong's economy is expected to resume positive growth this year, but the progress of economic recovery will hinge on the development of the epidemic. As cross-boundary movement of people and tourism activities take time to resume to normal, the economy will still face significant challenges in the first half of the year. Nevertheless, as long as the community gather together to control the epidemic and social stability is maintained, economic recovery will likely gain a stronger momentum in the second half of the year in tandem with an expected rebound in the global economy. Having regard to the latest internal and external situation, as well as the stimulus effect of the fiscal measures, I forecast that our economy will grow by 3.5% to 5.5% in real terms this year. On inflation, external price pressures are expected to remain modest. After 2 consecutive years of contraction, overall economic activities will remain below the pre-recession level this year and should not pose notable pressure on local costs. I forecast that the headline and underlying inflation rates will be 1.6% and 1% respectively this year. In the medium term, Hong Kong will continue to benefit from the ongoing development of the mainland and the shift in global economic gravity from west to east. The economic outlook is positive. Our country's economy will continue to advance during the 14th five-year plan period. The signing of the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership or RCEP agreement will further promote economic integration in the region. Hong Kong can open up greater room for development by leveraging the advantages under one country, two systems, playing its unique role as a gateway and an intermediary, integrating into the new overall development of our country, actively participating in the national dual circulation development strategy, and seizing opportunities brought by the development of the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau, Greater Bay Area, and the Belt and Road Initiative. On the other hand, the government will strive to overcome land and talent constraints, promote innovation and technology development, invest in education and nurture talent, and strengthen connection with the world. Considering the above factors and taking into account the catch-up growth that will follow the initial economic recovery this year, I forecast that Hong Kong's economy will grow by an average of 3.3% per annum in real terms from 2022 to 2025, while the underlying inflation rate will average 2%. Riding out the sun, fighting the virus together. It is the government's top priority to contain the epidemic so that businesses and the public can be back to their daily routines. A high-level steering committee command center led by the chief executive was set up in January 2020 to formulate strategies and measures swiftly in response to the development of the epidemic with a view to achieving the target of zero infections. I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to those joining the fight against the epidemic, including healthcare staff, as well as businesses and individuals who have been supporting the government's anti-epidemic measures. I will continue to provide adequate resources to fully support the work. The government strives to step up surveillance and testing efforts in order to identify cases in the community as early as possible to help cut the transmission chains. Various means are provided to collect specimens up to about 100,000 for testing each day. At present, the actual testing capacity of public and private laboratories in Hong Kong has reached a level of over 100,000 tests per day. The government has allocated 4.7 billion from the Anti-Epidemic Fund to support the anti-epidemic work of the Hospital Authority, ensuring sufficient support and protection for frontline healthcare staff. The government also provides an additional allocation of $3.044 billion, mainly for the HA to establish and operate the community treatment facility at the Asia World Expo and the Hong Kong Infection Control Center at the North Lantau Hospital. The former has commenced services in phases since last August, and the latter from the end of this month. The government has earmarked over $8.4 billion for the procurement and administration of COVID-19 vaccines. Our target is to have the majority of the population vaccinated for free within 2021. The COVID-19 vaccination program started yesterday and will provide vaccination for 5 priority groups of citizens. The government will seek funding support from the Finance Committee of the LegCo at the end of this month to establish a vaccination indemnity fund with $1 billion. Overcoming the epidemic. The AEF is set up to enhance Hong Kong's capability in combating the epidemic and provide relief for industries and the public hit hard by the epidemic. The measures launched under the AEF and the relief measures that I put forward in my last budget involve a total of over $300 billion, providing an expected support effect of more than 5% of GDP. Having regard to the financial affordability of the government, I will implement the following measures to continue to support enterprises, safeguard jobs, and relieve people's burden. To support enterprises, I will implement the following measures involving a total of about 9.5 billion. A. Reducing profits tax for the year of assessment 2020 to 21 by 100%, subject to a ceiling of $10,000. The reduction will be reflected in the final tax payable for the year of assessment 2020 to 21. This will benefit 128,000 businesses and reduce government revenue by $1.05 billion. B. Providing rates concession for non-domestic properties for 4 quarters of 2021 to 22, subject to a ceiling of $5,000 per quarter in the first 2 quarters and a ceiling of $2,000 per quarter in the remaining 2 quarters for each rateable property. This proposal is estimated to involve 420,000 non-domestic properties and reduce government revenue by $3.4 billion. C. Waiving the business registration fees for 2021 to 22. This will benefit 1.5 million business operators and reduce government revenue by $3 billion. D. Continuing to waive 75% of water and sewage charges payable by non-domestic households for 8 months starting from April 2021, subject to a monthly ceiling of $20,000 and $12,500 respectively per household. This will benefit 250,000 non-domestic households and reduce government revenue by $680 million. And E. Continuing to grant the 75% rental or fee concession currently applicable to eligible tenants of government properties and eligible short-term tenancies and waivers under the Lands Department for 6 months starting from April. During the period, tenants who have to close their properties at the request of the government will continue to receive full rental waiver for the duration of the closure. This will reduce government revenue by $1.4 billion. The government has introduced a number of enhancements to the SME financing guarantee scheme, including the rollout of the 90% guarantee product and the 1-year special 100% guarantee product to provide enterprises with low interest loans or interest subsidies, as well as principal moratorium, during which only interest payments have to be made, giving them more breathing space for recovery. As at the end of January, a total of $42.7 billion in loans was approved under the 100% guarantee product, benefiting over 20,000 enterprises involving 260,000 employees. As the epidemic has been lingering for over a year, in order to continue to relieve the cash flow pressure of SMEs, I will extend the application period of the special 100% guarantee product to the end of this year, further increase the maximum loan amount per enterprise from the total amount of employee wages and rents for 12 months to that for 18 months, and raise the loan ceiling from $5 million to $6 million. Extend the maximum repayment period from 5 years to 8 years, and extend the maximum duration of principal moratorium from 12 to 18 months. The Hong Kong Mortgage Corporation Insurance Limited will announce the details later. Further to the launch of the pre-approved principal payment holiday scheme, together with the banking sector in response to the epidemic, last May, the HAMA announced in November that this scheme would be extended for 6 months to April 2021, having regard to the ongoing impact of the epidemic on economic activities. Some 120,000 eligible corporate customers are covered by the scheme. Under the scheme and other relief initiatives offered by banks, about 59,000 cases have been approved by banks to support enterprises as at end January, involving about $50 billion. Support employment. Following the allocation of funding to enhance the upgrading special scheme run by the Employees Retraining Board in last year's budget, the ELB launched the third tranche of the scheme in January to provide training and allowance for 20,000 trainees affected by the economic situation. The government will ask the ELB to launch the fourth tranche of the scheme in July, which will last for 6 months until the end of this year, benefiting 20,000 trainees. The ELB will continue to provide more training options under the scheme and more online courses for trainees to engage in distance learning during the epidemic. Having regard to the advancement in technology and changes in learning mode, the government plans to expand the scope of the Continuing Education Fund to include online courses to provide learners with more diversified ways of continuing learning. Meanwhile, we will ensure effective supervision over the quality of courses and teaching. The government will consult the sector to implement the measure upon commencement of the new school term in September. In 2020 to 21, the government created about 31,000 time-limited jobs in the public and private sectors through the AEF. As at end January, some 16,000 employments were made. I propose to further allocate $6.6 billion to create about 30,000 time-limited jobs for a period of 12 months. I will also introduce the following one-off measures to alleviate the impacts of the economic downturn on the public. A. Reducing salaries, tax, and tax under personal assessment for the year of assessment 2020 to 21 by 100%, subject to a ceiling of $10,000. The reduction will be reflected in the final tax payable for the year of assessment 2020 to 21. This will benefit 1.87 million taxpayers and reduce government revenue by 11.4 billion. B. Providing rates concession for domestic properties for 4 quarters of 2020 to 21, 21 to 22, subject to a ceiling of 1.5 thousand per quarter in the first 2 quarters and a ceiling of 1,000 per quarter in the remaining 2 quarters for each rateable property. This proposal is estimated to involve 2.95 million domestic properties and reduce government revenue by 11.6 billion. C. Granting each residential electricity account a subsidy of $1,000. This measure will involve an expenditure of $2.8 billion and benefit over 2.7 million eligible households. D. Providing an allowance to eligible Social Security recipients equal to 1/2 of a month of the standard rate CSSA payment, old age allowance, old age living allowance, or disability allowance. This will involve additional expenditure of $2.382 billion. Similar arrangements will apply to recipients of the Working Family Allowance and individual-based work incentive transport subsidy involving additional expenditure of $121 million. And E. Paying the examination fees for school candidates sitting for the 2022 Hong Kong Diploma of Secondary Education examination, incurring $150 million. This prolonged economic downturn has plunged some people into financial difficulties. In view of this, many people have demanded temporary unemployment assistance. The government has reiterated the policy considerations it has taken into account for not accepting the proposal and instead provided a time-limited special scheme under the CSSA scheme to help the unemployed. Considering that many grassroots have been suffering from underemployment amid the epidemic, the government proposes to relax the working hour requirements under the Working Family Allowance Scheme. Among them, the current basic working hour requirement of not fewer than 144 hours per month for non-single parent households will be substantially lowered by half for 1 year. The measure will be implemented in June at the earliest, subject to FC approval. To provide an extra financing option for the unemployed, I suggest setting up a special 100% loan guarantee for individual scheme as a supplementary measure. The government will offer a guarantee for loans provided under the scheme. The maximum loan amount per applicant is set at 6 times of his or her average monthly income during employment, subject to a ceiling of $80,000. There will be a principal moratorium for the first 12 months. Afterwards, the principal and interest can be repaid over a period of up to 5 years with an interest rate fixed at 1% per annum. Applicants who have repaid loans in full as scheduled will be offered full reimbursement for the interest paid. Freelancers who provide proof of loss of income may also apply for the loan. The government will provide a total guarantee commitment of $15 billion. The application period will last for 6 months. The Financial Services and the Treasury Bureau will, in collaboration with the HKMCIL, announce the details in due course. Amid the epidemic, the public are increasingly concerned about environmental hygiene issues such as misconnection and dilapidation of the drainage pipes of buildings. I will earmark $1 billion to provide subsidies for owners of more than 3,000 old buildings with relatively low rateable values to carry out drainage repair or enhancement works. For buildings with owners having difficulties in organizing the works by themselves, such as 3 new buildings, the Buildings Department will exercise its power under the Buildings Ordinance to carry out the works in default of their owners in an orderly manner based on the risk profile. The owners concerned may also benefit from the subsidy scheme, reviving the economy after the epidemic, while having a profound effect on the global economic development and structure, as well as people's lifestyle. To enable our economy to revive after the epidemic, we would adopt a targeted approach. Apart from helping enterprises adapt to the economic new normal after the epidemic and stimulating consumption, we should also promote our advantages outside Hong Kong. I will elaborate on the relevant measures in the ensuing parts of our speech.
Digital economy. many traditional industries have accelerated the application of technology in their operations due to the epidemic. Examples include digital payment, smart self-service systems, and various online businesses, customer services, and workflow management. For many people who stay at home during the epidemic, the use of online shopping services, video streaming platforms, and online conference software has become the new mode of working, studying, and entertainment. For various trades, it has now become a trend to speed up digital transformation in order to adapt to the new consumption modes and habits of the people. Only by making good use of information technology can enterprises seize the opportunities of development when the epidemic is over. In view of the above, we have launched the Distance Business Program under the AEF to provide funding support for enterprises to adopt information technology solutions and cover the expenses for providing relevant training to their employees. The program has received an overwhelming response since its launch in mid-2020, and a total funding of nearly $800 million has been granted. We have subsequently allocated an additional funding of $1 billion for the continuation of the program and further enhancements. The challenges posed by the epidemic have also catalyzed local R&D developments. They not only incentivize businesses to conduct research and developments for products or innovative services, but also provide enterprises with suitable contexts for application. The electronic wristbands used for home confinement and the touchless lift button system are some good examples. The government will continue to support enterprises of manufacturers through, among others, the Public Sector Trial Scheme, the Technology Voucher Program, and the Reindustrialization Funding Scheme in realizing and commercializing their R&D outcomes, using technological services to improve their productivity or business process, and setting up smart production lines in Hong Kong. This will enable them to better grasp the opportunities brought by the new economy. I will allocate a total of $375 million to the Hong Kong Trade Development Council (TDC) in 3 years, starting from 2020 to 21 to 22, for developing virtual platforms to enhance its capability to organize online activities and to proceed with digitalization. Moreover, the TDC will promote Hong Kong's strength in the development of the GBA and in healthcare products and services. It will also explore the use of its physical and online business-to-consumer platforms to assist young business starters in promoting their original products and gauging the preference of consumers. In light of the epidemic, we have expedited our work in taking forward e-government by providing more electronic services to make it easier for enterprises and individuals to submit applications, make payments, obtain licenses, and use government services. By mid-2022, unless there are legal or operational constraints, all government forms and license applications can be submitted electronically. Besides, e-payment options, including the faster payment system, will be available for making payments in respect of most government bills and licenses starting from mid-2022. The I Am Smart, a one-stop personalized digital service platform, was launched at the end of last year. The HAMA is currently working with the Office of the Government's Chief Information Officer, that is OGCIO, to develop the business version of the I Am Smart digital authentication platform. It can be used to authenticate the identity of enterprises through an electronic channel. With the wide adoption of I Am Smart in various electronic government services, members of the public can choose to obtain their data kept by individual government departments by electronic means and submit such data electronically when applying for services from financial institutions. In addition, the HAMA has earlier announced the development of commercial data interchange, which will allow commercial services operators to submit customers' data to financial institutions under the instruction and consent of their corporate customers, so as to assist them in the application for services. To promote the law tech developments, I set aside funding in the 2019-20 budget to support the development of an online dispute resolution and deal-making platform by a non-governmental organization (NGO). With an allocation of $100 million to the project, starting from this year, the platform will roll out negotiation, arbitration, mediation, and online training services progressively, and develop other services such as e-translation and smart contracting phases. This year, the government will actively explore the developments of the Hong Kong Legal Cloud in order to sharpen Hong Kong's edge and raise our status in the provision of professional legal services.
面對目前嘅特殊
In view of the current special situation, the government should make good use of the fiscal reserves to energize the market, stimulate the economy, and facilitate the speedy recovery of the consumption market and other economic segments in a timely manner. After careful consideration, I will issue electronic consumption vouchers in installments with a total value of $5,000 to each eligible Hong Kong permanent resident and new arrival aged 18 or above, so as to encourage and boost local consumption. This measure, which involves involves a financial commitment of about $36 billion. It's expected to benefit around 7.2 million people. The government will identify suitable stored value facilities operators to help roll out the scheme and will announce the details of the scheme as soon as possible. Explore markets. I will inject $1.5 billion into the dedicated fund on branding, upgrading, and domestic sales, and substantially extend in phases its geographical coverage from 20 to 37 economies to include all those with which Hong Kong has entered into investment promotion and protection agreements, IPPAs. The funding ceiling for each enterprise will be increased from $4 million to $6 million so as to support enterprises in exploring more diversified markets by fully utilizing the better protection offered by the IPPAs. Support tourism. The epidemic has dealt a heavy blow to the local tourism industry, bringing it to a standstill. Apart from the financial support of nearly $2.6 billion that has already been provided for the tourism industry, I will further earmark a total of $934 million to enhance tourism resources, of which $169 million will be used to continue to take forward local cultural, heritage, and creative tourism projects, such as the Yim Tin Jai Arts Festival and the City in Time. We will continue to improve the facilities along hiking trails to develop more green tourism resources. The purpose is to offer leisure and travel experience with rich historical and cultural elements to both locals and visitors. I will also earmark $765 million to support the Hong Kong Tourism Board, HKTB, in reviving our tourism industry. The HKTB has launched promotional programs such as Holiday at Home and 360 Hong Kong Moments, with a view to enhancing local ambience and consumption as well as maintaining the promotion and exposure of Hong Kong in visitor source markets. Upon gradual resumption of cross-boundary travel, the Hong Kong TB will roll out promotional offers to attract visitors through the Open House Hong Kong platform. The HKTB is also conducting a comprehensive review of the positioning of Hong Kong's tourism in the long run in response to the new normal after the epidemic, with a view to formulating appropriate strategies to spur the recovery of the tourism industry. Provided that public health can be safeguarded, the government will consider relaxing restrictions on group gatherings in relation to local group tours again to allow room for business operation for the tourism industry. The government will discuss and work out arrangements regarding air travel bubble with places that have close economic and trade relations with Hong Kong and where the epidemic situation is relatively stable. Apart from the above initiatives, additional resources will also be allocated to enhance country parks, recreational facilities, harbour fronts, etc. These enhancements will improve people's quality of life when the epidemic is over and may also appeal to our visitors. I will provide more details in the ensuing parts of my speech. Promote Hong Kong. Once the pandemic further subsides, the government will launch a large-scale publicity and promotional campaign at home and abroad, showcasing to the world the image of Hong Kong as a highly open international city in the GBA from various perspectives such as finance, INT, culture and creativity, and tourism, as well as our unique advantages under one country, two systems. We hope to attract enterprises, investors, and talents to Hong Kong. Invest Hong Kong and our overseas offices will step up their efforts in this area. Positioning and directions for economic development. First, assessment of situation. Hong Kong has been leveraging the support from the mainland while engaging the world. Over the past many years, we have been utilizing our advantages in institution, talents, and external connections and served as a bridge between our country and the rest of the world in different ways in response to our country's ever-changing needs. By doing so, Hong Kong has contributed to national development and at the same time promoted its own development and economic growth. Only by making good use of the advantages of one country, two systems, with the precondition of strengthening national security, can we continue to play and even enhance our role on this front. Over the past 2 years, Hong Kong has been affected by the deterioration of the China-US relations and experienced the blow from the social incidents and the ravages of the pandemic. However, we should not let these challenges weaken our confidence in the future. Instead, we should learn from the experience and make correct assessments of the major development trends. First, the world is facing profound changes unseen in its century. The economic gravity is shifting from west to east, and the political setting has also seen subtle changes. Our country's composite national strength has enhanced significantly, while other developing countries in Asia have undergone robust developments. However, with the rise of unilateralism in recent years and the misunderstandings of some Western countries towards Hong Kong's developments, we are facing greater difficulties. The epidemic has increased various countries' concerns about development security, which might further escalate protectionism. Some nations encourage or even ask enterprises to move back to their home countries, impacting on the development and setting of global value chains. Second, the world is facing drastic disruptions brought by technological revolution, which have far-reaching implications for our personal life, modes of production and operation, economic structures, development prospects, and international landscape. The pandemic has also accelerated changes in the mode of business operation and people's living habits. Making good use of digital technology is not only essential to effective business operation, but also crucial for preventing and combating the pandemic and protecting public health and safety. Whether a place can attain a leading position in INT will determine its success or failure. Third, green development is a major global trend. Environmental pollution and climate change have become too serious to ignore. There is a general recognition in the international community that we should promote green and low-carbon development, which involves extensive new areas. The government needs to have visions and determination. The people need to build awareness of environmental protection and corresponding habits. The business sector needs to develop and adopt novel technologies and launch products of high efficiency. Other matching service financial supports are also needed. Fourth, as for Hong Kong, we have experienced many changes at different points in our history, but the support of our country has remained unchanged. With the advantages under one country, two systems, Hong Kong has a unique and irreplaceable role in the national development. Functions and positioning. With its deep and extensive connections with the world, Hong Kong will continue to be an important platform for economic exchanges and trade between the mainland and the international community. As mentioned in the proposal for formulating the National 14th Five-Year Plan, our country supports Hong Kong in consolidating and bolstering our competitive edges, building the city as an international INT hub, fostering the development of the city as a BNR functional platform, and achieving diversified and sustainable development of the economy. With our country's support, we can further capitalize on our advantages and realize our potential. We must step up our efforts to explore international economic and trade opportunities and actively participate in national development through making use of our industries with competitive strengths. Hong Kong has prominent functional roles in various aspects, such as pooling international capital and talent and providing a platform to align the country's standards with the international ones. In addition, Hong Kong serves as a testing ground and firewall in our country's promotion of financial sector reform and opening up, such as the internationalization of renminbi. Under our country's dual circulation development strategy, Hong Kong will definitely achieve greater success in the future, as long as we can give full play to our unique roles as a gateway, a springboard, and an intermediary. Leveraging our close proximity, Hong Kong can make use of the GBA development as an entry point, participating actively in the development of our country's domestic circulation for capturing the enormous business opportunities. As an international metropolis that connects the world, Hong Kong can help the expansion of the country's external circulation and in consequence further strengthen its status as an international center for finance, commerce and trade, as well as a home for corporate headquarters. In face of rising unilateralism, it is all the more important for us to actively promote multilateralism, dismantle various barriers, and strengthen Hong Kong's links with the international community. We should further expand Hong Kong's trade, investment, and tax agreement networks. The free trade agreement and the investment agreement between Hong Kong and the ASEAN nations have recently come into full effect. In November last year, our country signed the RCEP agreements with 14 economies. We are actively seeking to be among the first batch of economies joining the RCEP after it comes to effect, so as to help our businesses and investors open up markets, thereby fostering the long-term economic development of Hong Kong. The way forward for industries. From the perspective of industries, Hong Kong has huge development potential in areas including financial services, INT, green economy, air cargo, supply chain management, and professional services. Financial services are an important support to the real economy. On top of being a leading asset and wealth management center, Hong Kong is also an international fundraising platform, an insurance and risk management center, and an offshore RMB hub. Our financial services can assist mainland enterprises in raising funds and provide outlets and risk management for mainland funds, as well as facilitating the mainland's ongoing financial liberalization in a secure and orderly manner in support of the development of our country's real economy. We must continue to strengthen Hong Kong's leading position in the global financial market. Hong Kong enjoys a number of advantages in INT development, such as top-notch capabilities in basic scientific research, intellectual property rights protection, attractiveness to research talents from all over the world, and first-class financial support services. In recent years, the government has allocated substantial resources and implemented a number of preferential policies and been blessed with our country's support. As long as we can leverage our advantages and achieve coordinated development with our brother cities that have advanced manufacturing industries in the GBA, we can form an I&T upstream, midstream, and downstream industrial chain and develop the GBA into an international I&T center, thus contributing to our country's technological self-reliance and at the same time identifying new areas of growth for Hong Kong's economy. Nowadays, when everyone is striving to live a quality life, decarbonization, waste reduction, building of a green environment and a sustainable city, etc., have become a social consensus. The international community, including our country and the European Union, have set achieving carbon neutrality as an important development goal. A significant synergy effect can be generated between green economy and other industries such as the I&T and financial sectors. A robust, green and sustainable financial services can contribute to the development of green economy in the mainland and Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a world-class logistics and supply chain management center with a well-established network of air routes, a highly efficient airport, as well as simple and fast customs clearance procedures. Hong Kong's air cargo transport sector plays a leading role in the world. We will strive to enhance our intermodal transportation services in the future with a view to increasing the global accessibility of the GBA. This will facilitate not only the exports of goods from the GBA to overseas markets, but also the imports of quality products from around the world to the mainland, meeting the increasing consumer demands here. Technology is reshaping the interplay between the supply of goods and the demand of consumers, and the prospects for our high-end logistics and supply chain management services are bright. As our country seeks to achieve high-quality development, the demand for various types of professional services such as legal, accounting, construction, and project management services is on the rise. These areas are where our strength lie. Hong Kong's professionals can provide services in a market full of opportunities and also promote the alignment of industry standards in the mainland with those of the international community. Apart from the above industries, there is also a growing demand for inclusion of cultural and creative elements in the cyber world. I will allocate additional resources to promote the development of cultural and creative industries so that young people can have more employment and business startup opportunities for unleashing the potential and realizing their dreams. GBA. As mentioned earlier, the GBA is the best entry point for Hong Kong to participate in the domestic circulation of a country's economy, be it for the mutual market access for financial services and products, cooperation and collaboration in respect of innovation and technology, or people stay and living across the boundary. Continued innovation in institutional and policy arrangements is needed so as to ensure a smoother two-way flow of funds, people, and factors of production. The Guangdong Hong Kong Macau Greater Bay Area Development Office has been set up to strengthen the planning, coordination, and promotion of the various policies and measures relating to GBA development and enhance the community's understanding of GBA development. The government also helps Hong Kong's businesses and youths to grasp the opportunities arising from GBA development through various schemes. Belt and Road. Our country has signed cooperation agreements with about 170 countries and international organizations regarding the BNR initiative. The government will continue to provide financing services to BNR infrastructure projects through leveraging Hong Kong's function as an international financial center, encouraging Hong Kong enterprises and professional services sectors to develop business in the overseas economic and trade cooperation zones set up by our country, and establish connections with mainland enterprises and industry associations for jointly exploring new markets, thereby consolidating our role as a prime functional platform and key node for the BNR initiative. Financial services. Comprehensive and superb financial services are crucial for an economy gearing for high-quality development. The value added of the financial services industry in Hong Kong accounted for 21% of the GDP in 2019. Its share of the overall employment increased from 6.8% in 2018 to 7.1% in 2019. Hong Kong has always been an offshore financing center for mainland enterprises and an important conduit for international capital to enter the mainland market. The capital markets of Hong Kong and the mainland can complement and interact positively with each other. Last year's total transaction value of the southbound and northbound trading of Stock Connect programs more than doubled than that of the year before. The mutual market access programs have been operating smoothly. Hong Kong can contribute more proactively to our country's dual circulation strategy. The FSTB, together with the HKMA, the Securities and Futures Commission, SFC, and the Insurance Authority, IA, had set up a joint working group to explore how Hong Kong can complement the economic and financial developments of our country and meet the needs of international investors, and examine how to further enhance our competitiveness as an international financial center on the basis of our existing capacities. It will set out the development blueprints and put forward concrete proposals and measures for engagement with the central authorities to secure their support. Green and sustainable finance. Having regard to the goal of achieving carbon neutrality before 2050, we will continue to promote the development of green and sustainable finance, encouraging institutions to conduct relevant investments, financing, and certification activities and attract top-notch institutions and talents to Hong Kong to provide the relevant services. We will join hands with the financial sector and relevant stakeholders to take forward the strategic plan announced at the end of last year by the Green and Sustainable Finance Cross-Agency Steering Group, thereby leveraging our role as an international financial center to mobilize capital towards sustainable projects in the region and enhance Hong Kong's position as a green and sustainable finance hub in the region. Last month, we successfully offered the second batch of government green bonds totaling $2.5 billion, among which the 30-year tranche is the longest tenor bond issued by the government and the longest tenor USD-denominated government bond in Asia to date. We plan to issue green bonds regularly and expand the scale of the government's green bond program. We propose to double the borrowing ceiling of the program to $200 billion to allow for further issuance of green bonds totaling $175.5 billion within the next 5 years, having regard to the market situation. This will also give us more room for piloting the issuance of green bonds that involves more types of currencies, project types, and issuance channels, thereby further enriching the green finance ecosystem in Hong Kong. We also plan to issue retail green bonds for the participation of the general public. The pilot bond grant scheme and the green bond grant scheme rolled out by the government previously will expire by mid-2021. I will consolidate the two schemes into a green and sustainable finance grant scheme to provide subsidy for eligible bond issuers and loan borrowers to cover their expenses on bond issuance and external review services. The scheme will last for 3 years, and the HKMA will announce relevant details in due course.
Bond market. Through the active promotion of the government, Hong Kong's bond market has seen sustained growth, now ranking third in Asia, excluding Japan, in terms of total amount of bond issuances. I will lead a steering group comprising members from the FSCB, the HKMA, the SFC, the IA, and the Hong Kong Exchanges and Clearing Limited to formulate a roadmap for promoting the diversified development of Hong Kong's bond market and reinforcing its functions. We will enhance the efficiency and capacity of our domestic central money makers unit, or CMU, and introduce new functions to cope with the increasing market demand for northbound trading of Bond Connect and support its future commissioning of southbound trading, with a view to providing a risk-controlled channel for mainland investors to participate in local and overseas bond markets. We will develop the CMU as a major central securities depository platform in Asia and in the world in the long run. Bond Connect development. We target to expand Bond Connect to cover both southbound and northbound trading. The implementation of southbound trading will further facilitate mainland investors to make diversified asset allocation and present enormous opportunities for Hong Kong's financial industry. The HKMA and People's Bank of China have set up a working group to drive the initiative of southbound trading of Bond Connect, with the target of launching it within the year. Retail bond market. Given that the global low interest rate environment will persist for a considerably long time, and many people in the community, especially the elderly, prefer investment options with steady and reliable returns, we plan to continue to issue no less than $24 billion of silver bond and no less than $15 billion of I-bond this year. We propose to raise the borrowing limit of the government bond program from $200 billion to $300 billion to allow sufficient room for bond issuances to achieve the objective of promoting the sustainable development of Hong Kong's bond market. The eligible age for subscribing silver bond will be lowered from 65 to 60. We are committed to developing the real estate investment trust market in Hong Kong and reinforcing the city's role as a premier capital raising center while offering investors a wide range of investment options with relatively stable returns. Subsidies will be provided for qualifying REITs authorized by the SFC and listed in Hong Kong in the coming 3 years to encourage the listing of more REITs in Hong Kong. The subsidy will cover 70% of the expenses paid to local professional service providers for the listing of REITs subject to a cap of $8 million per REIT. The SFC will announce relevant details in due course. Securities market. Undaunted by challenges from external factors, the Hong Kong stock market recorded an average daily turnover of 129.5 billion last year, representing a rise of 49% over the year before. A total of 397.5 billion was raised through initial public offerings during the same period, representing an increase of 27% over the year before, and among which over 90% of the funds were raised by mainland enterprises. Not only is Hong Kong a preferred international fundraising platform, it is also the world's second largest fundraising hub for biotechnology companies. There have been 43 companies listed under the new listing regime in Hong Kong since its introduction, raising a total of over $420 billion, which accounts for about 40% of total IPO funds raised in the period. These companies have a combined market cap of over 11 trillion, accounting for about 1/4 of the current total market cap in Hong Kong. They include 10 China concept stock companies returning to Hong Kong for secondary listing and 31 pre-revenue or pre-profit biotech companies. Our earlier efforts in enhancing the listing regime are gradually delivering results. The Hong Kong EX will review the overall secondary listing regime, including whether Greater China companies with non-weighted voting rights structures have to be companies in the field of INT in order to seek secondary listing in Hong Kong through the new concessionary route, as well as their corresponding market capitalization requirements. The Hong Kong EX will consult the market in due course. Stock Connect expands the depth and breadth of the capital market in Hong Kong and is in line with our country's financial development strategy. We will seek to expand its capacity continuously, including the progressive inclusion of ETF and other types of assets, as well as expansion of the scope of eligible securities. With international investors' increased participation in the A-share market through Stock Connect, there's a growing demand for using A-share index futures to hedge market risks. The Hong Kong EX will accelerate the preparatory work for the launch of MSCI China A Index Futures contract. We are currently undertaking a series of legislative work to provide for half-rate profits tax concessions to eligible insurance businesses, including marine insurance and specialty insurance, facilitate the issuance of insurance-linked securities or ILS in Hong Kong, expand the scope of insurable risks of captive insurance companies, and enhance the group-wide supervision framework by the end of next month. We are also preparing for the implementation of a risk-based capital regime for the insurance industry to replace the rule-based capital adequacy regime. I propose launching a 2-year pilot insurance-linked securities grant scheme to attract insurance enterprises or organizations to issue ILS in Hong Kong. The amount of grant for issuance will be kept at 12 million, depending on the maturity of the ILS. The IA will announce details in due course. Asset and wealth management. Since the establishment of the 2 new fund structures, namely the open-ended fund company and the limited partnership fund, the investment fund regime of Hong Kong has become more comprehensive. With 11 OFCs and over 100 LPFs already set up, Hong Kong's status as an international asset and wealth management center has been consolidated. We plan to submit a legislative proposal in the second quarter of this year to allow foreign investment funds to redomicile to Hong Kong for registration as OFCs or LPFs. OFC suits various types of investment funds. We will provide subsidies to cover 70% of the expenses paid to local professional service providers for SFCs set up or redomiciled to Hong Kong in the coming 3 years, subject to a cap of $1 million per OFC. The SFC will announce relevant details in due course. We have introduced an amendment bill to provide tax concessions for carried interest issued by private equity funds operating in Hong Kong. We strive to secure the LegCo's passage of the bill within the current session for the tax concession arrangements to apply starting from 2020 to 21. To enhance our attractiveness as a hub for family offices, Invest Hong Kong and regulators will offer one-stop support services to family offices interested in establishing a presence in Hong Kong. We will also review the relevant tax arrangements. Innovation and technology. In the past 3 years, the government allocated over 100 billion to support the development of INT. We already have 8 unicorns, making Hong Kong comparable to many larger economies. Despite the huge challenges imposed by the epidemic as well as the internal and external environments, I'm convinced that the promotion of INT is the right direction for the long-term development of Hong Kong. In recent years, the number of research personnel and the number of staff members of startups in Hong Kong have increased substantially. To nurture INT talent, the Education Bureau has implemented a number of measures to promote STEM education, including curriculum updating, providing professional training for teachers, subsidizing and organizing large-scale learning activities such as the STEM Education Fair. The Standing Committee on STEM Education of the Curriculum Development Council steers and promotes the long-term development of STEM education in primary and secondary schools, as well as reviews continuously the relevant curriculum. The IT Innovation Lab in Secondary Schools program has received positive response since its launch. I will set aside over 200 million to extend the program to primary schools. Funding of up to 400,000 will be provided to each subsidized primary school in the coming 3 school years, thereby rolling out a knowing more about IT program to enhance students' interest and knowledge in IT and their applications through extracurricular activities to prepare them for integration into the knowledge-based economy and participation in the development of a digital society. The OGO will set up a one-stop support center to provide assistance to primary schools. Last year, I earmarked 40 million to implement a pilot scheme under which subsidies are provided for students who study science and technology in local universities to enroll in short-term INT-related internships. More than 1,600 students and over 1,000 enterprises participated in the scheme, and 80% of the interns indicated that they would consider pursuing a career in INT after graduation. Given the overwhelming response, I announced that the scheme will be regularized. The government will launch a global STEM professorship scheme in the first half of the year to support universities in attracting world-renowned INT scholars and their team to Hong Kong to participate in STEM teaching and research. The scheme will involve an expenditure of about 2 billion, which will be borne by the government, the universities, and the Hong Kong Jockey Club Charities Trust. Job opportunities and continuous training are also crucial for nurturing INT talent. In the past 3 years, the Research Talent Hub has funded over 3,700 R&D positions. Among those engaged, about 1,400 are postdoctoral talent. The Reindustrialization and Technology Training Program provided on-the-job training for over 3,500 employees of some 1,800 enterprises to enable them to have a better grasp of the development of the new economy and INT. The Greater Bay Area Youth Employment Scheme, launched earlier this year, also provides about 700 INT places to encourage enterprises to employ Hong Kong's university graduates so that the latter can undertake INT-related work and receive on-the-job training in Hong Kong and another city in GBA. Innovation and Technology Infrastructure. Over 80% of the areas in the 2 buildings under Stage 1 of the Science Park expansion program has been occupied. As for the Data Technology Hub in the Cheung Kwan O Industrial Estate, since its commencement of operation in the 4th quarter of last year, 16 enterprises have already set up offices there or signed tenancy agreements. Besides, a number of enterprises have expressed interest in setting up offices in the hub. The InnoCell adjacent to the Science Park was completed at the end of last year, providing about 500 residential spaces with flexible design facilities such as shared workspaces for the research personnel in the Science Park. Leasing activities will commence and a trial run will be held in the first half of this year. The supply of R&D and working spaces in the Hong Kong Science Park and Cyberport falls short of demand. In the last 2 budgets, resources were set aside for the Science Park expansion and Cyberport 5 development, which will respectively provide 28,000 and 63,000 square meters of floor area, mainly for R&D or operation of INT enterprises. We are also pressing ahead with the development of the Hong Kong-Shenzhen Innovation and Technology Park in the Lok Ma Chau Loop. A provision of about 32.5 billion has been approved for the project. Works have already commenced. The first batch of facilities is expected to be completed in phases from 2024 to 2027. The economic contribution to Hong Kong of which is expected to reach 5.5 billion per annum, with about 4,800 jobs to be created. Upon full development, the park will be the largest ever INT platform in Hong Kong, providing a gross floor area of 1.2 million square meters which is approximately 3 times that of the Science Park. Its economic contribution to Hong Kong is expected to reach $55 billion per annum, with about 52,000 jobs to be created. On digital infrastructure, the coverage of 5G network in Hong Kong is now over 90%. The subsidy scheme for expanding fiber-based network to villages in remote areas will be completed in phases from this year. The government will continue to support the development of 5G networks and applications, release more 5G spectrum in different frequency bands, facilitate the setting up of radio base stations by operators at suitable government venues and public facilities, assist in the relocation of the typo satellite earth stations, and provide land at Chung Ham Kok Teleport for the development of infrastructure to connect with external telecom facilities. Promote research and development. Over the past few years, we have been dedicated to promoting R&D, but it takes time to deliver results. These efforts are gradually bearing fruit, with a rising GDP on R&D activities in recent years, boosting our confidence in promoting R&D. Amendments were made to the Inland Revenue Ordinance in late 2018 to provide for enhanced tax reduction for qualifying R&D expenditure to encourage enterprises to devote resources to local R&D. The total amount of R&D expenditure for which claims for tax deduction were made in the first year of assessment has more than doubled since the implementation of this measure. 70% of this amount enjoy enhanced tax deduction. The measure has delivered notable results. Since permission was granted for the remittance of mainland R&D funding to Hong Kong, the State Ministry of Science and Technology, Guangdong Provincial Government, and Shenzhen Municipal Government in the past 2 years have approved over renminbi 340 million for universities and research institutes in Hong Kong to conduct R&D or set up laboratories, adding impetus for local R&D activities. The Inno-Hong Kong Research Clusters is our flagship project. It comprises Health at Inno-Hong Kong on healthcare technologies and Air at Inno-Hong Kong on artificial intelligence and robotics technologies, and has attracted many top-notch universities and research institutions in the world. The first batch of about 20 R&D labs will commence operation progressively in the first quarter of the year. This will further consolidate Hong Kong's position as a global research collaboration hub. Funding under the Innovation and Technology Fund increased by over 7 times in the last 7 years. I will inject $4.75 billion per year to the ITF 2 years in a row to sustain its 17 funding schemes, as well as the work of over 50 R&D labs in the next 3 years. Startups. Hong Kong's startup ecosystem has become increasingly vibrant, with an increase in the number of startups from about 1.1 thousand in 2014 to over 3.3 thousand last year. Investment from venture capital funds in Hong Kong also increased from 1.24 billion in 2014 to 9.9 billion in 2019, representing an increase of over 7 times. Over the past 3 years, I&T enterprises in the Science Park and Cyberport have attracted over $41 billion of investment. Besides, some 600 startups are being incubated by the Science Park and Cyberport, on top of the nearly 1.3 thousand startups already graduated from the programs. The Innovation and Technology Venture Fund has invested more than 100 million in 19 local startups over the past 2 years, attracting more than $500 million of private investment. The ITVF appointed 3 new co-investment partners late last year. We will continue to partner with venture capital funds to invest in local startups. In the past 3 years, the Hong Kong Science and Technology Parks Corporation has invested over 100 million in 13 technology enterprises through its corporate venture fund, attracting about $1.35 billion of private investment. The Cyberport Macro Fund, set up by Cyberport, also invested more than 120 million in 16 companies, attracting over $860 million of private investment. The HKSCPC and Cyberport will inject 350 million and 200 million into the 2 funds respectively, and extend their scope to cover Series B and later stage investments. The Technology Startup Support Scheme for universities has provided funding of about $120 million to 139 startups in the past 3 years. Among those startups which have benefited from the scheme since inception, over half of them have launched their products in the market. more than 40% have earned revenue and about 60% have received capital injection from investors with a total amount of some $530 million. Financial technology. The epidemic has sped up digital transformation of the Hong Kong financial market. On top of many fintech startups, there are 8 virtual banks, 4 virtual insurers, and a virtual asset trading platform having been authorized to operate in Hong Kong. With a view to fostering the development of more novel financial products, the HKSTPC and Cyberport will collaborate with the HKMA to attract more financial technology or research institutes to set up laboratories in Hong Kong with a focus on such areas as regulatory, technology, and cybersecurity, where Hong Kong enjoys clearest advantages. In addition to the FinTech Proof of Concept Subsidy Scheme announced in January, the Hong Kong MA is considering enhancing its FinTech supervisory sandbox by providing through train vetting and funding arrangements for those promising FinTech solutions to reduce the time for the launch of innovative financial products in the market. Foster reindustrialization. The reindustrialization funding scheme, which was launched in July last year, provides subsidies on a matching basis to manufacturers for setting up new smart production lines in Hong Kong. The scheme has received 12 applications so far. The Advanced Manufacturing Center in the Tseung Kwan O Industrial Estate and the Microelectronics Center in the Yuen Long Industrial Estate being developed by the HKSTPC will be completed in the coming years. These 2 centers will provide a total gross floor area of over 140,000 square meters for smart production and high-end manufacturing industries. Quite a number of enterprises have expressed interest in setting up establishment in the 2 centers. Air cargo sector. The Hong Kong International Airport is a double gateway connecting the world and the GBA. With further growth in external trade in the GBA, particularly the booming of e-commerce and the personalization of consumer demand, orders received by manufacturers are becoming small in amount with a narrow delivery window. It can be envisaged that there will be an increasingly keen regional demand for air cargo services. Last year, HAIA handled 4.5 million tons of cargoes and airmail, down by only 7% from the pre-epidemic level. The airport authority has active plans for developing intermodal cargo handling facilities so that there will be seamless transportation of mainland exports to the rest of the world through the HAIA and vice versa. With the expansion of the existing express air cargo terminal and the commissioning of a new premium logistics center as well as the 3-runway system, Hong Kong International Airport's annual cargo handling capacity is expected to increase from 7.4 million tons to some 9 million tons in 2024. When the airside intermodal cargo handling facility becomes operational as well, Hong Kong's position as the air cargo center of the GBA will be further reinforced. HAIA's capability in handling high-value, temperature-controlled air cargo is internationally recognized. In addition, the government will work with the AA to actively explore measures to facilitate transshipment through Hong Kong with a view to maintaining our competitive edge as an international air cargo hub. We are confident that the HAIA will become the busiest cargo airport in the world again when the epidemic is over. We will submit a funding application to the LegCo within this year to redevelop the airmail center at the HAIA with a view to bringing the center into operation by the end of 2027 at the earliest. We will continue to work with the AA and other postal authorities on maximizing the use of the center's transit handling capacity to support the long-term development of the postal industry in the GBA.
Cultural and creative industries. I will inject an additional $1 billion into the Create Smart initiative in 2021-22 to continuously drive the development of the creative industries. The government has continued to allocate more resources to the development of arts and culture in recent years. In 2021-22, the total expenditure will exceed $5.7 billion. The West Kowloon Cultural District, WKCD, is a new landmark and attraction in Hong Kong. With the opening of M+ and the Hong Kong Palace Museum in WKCD in this and next year respectively, and the expected completion of the Lyric Theatre Complex in 2024, diversified development opportunities will be brought to the local arts and cultural sector. We plan to seek funding approval in the current legislative session for taking forward the renovation of Chun Wan Public Library, the facility upgrading of Taipo Civic Center, as well as the renovation and improvement of Sai Wan Ho Civic Center. The above works cost a total of about $900 million, creating a total of some 210 employment opportunities. The government provided multiple rounds of assistance amounting to over $200 million to the arts and culture sector under the AEF, benefiting over 930 arts groups and over 6,800 arts practitioners. As many arts and culture activities were not able to stage, the industry has made use of technology to perform through various means, promoting the integration of arts and INT as a new trend of developments. The Home Affairs Bureau has established an inter-bureau task force with $100 million reserved to promote the integration of arts and technology and support arts groups and INT savvy. Infrastructure investment and construction industry. The government will continue to invest in infrastructure. The annual capital works expenditure will exceed $100 billion in coming years. The annual total construction output will increase to around $300 billion, creating over 300,000 employment opportunities. The government and the Construction Industry Council have been providing professional and comprehensive training programs for construction workers. The Hong Kong Institute of Construction also has a well-established training system offering a clear career progression path for its trainees. Measures to enhance training for skilled workers, subsidize the operation of SME contractors and registered subcontractors, and offer allowances to registered construction workers who are underemployed or temporarily unemployed for attending training courses have been implemented since January this year. The Development Bureau, DVB, established the Center of Excellence for Major Project Leaders, which is the first institution in Asia specializing in nurturing leaders for works projects. To enhance the professional skills of mid-tier managers in the government and uplifts the project's delivery capability, I've earmarked $6 million for provision of systematic training to them in the next 3 years with a view to ensuring more effective use of public resources. Cost management is an important part of the sustainable development of the construction industry. The Project Strategy and Governance Office of the DEVB, apart from implementing strategic measures to raise cost effectiveness within the government, will also promote cost management culture to the industry. The government actively promotes the modular integrated construction method. Intake for the first batch of pilot projects, including the inner cell of the Hong Kong Science Park and the disciplined services quarters for the Fire Services Department at Pak Shing Kok, is expected to commence early this year. Up to now, the Construction Innovation and Technology Fund has granted over $75 million to the industry for supporting the adoption of this method, and the Buildings Department has approved 31 pre-accepted MIC systems to facilitate their adoption by the private building developers. With $100 million allocated for the development of the integrated digital platform in the last budget, the platform will be implemented in phases from this year onwards for driving digitalization of public works through data integration and analysis to monitor projects' performance continuously and enhance the management of capital works projects. Building a livable city. Land supply. The 2021-22 land sale program comprises a total of 15 residential sites and 3 commercial sites, capable of providing about 6,000 residential units and about 480,000 square meters of commercial floor area respectively. With the residential sites under the land sale program, together with railway property development projects, private developments and redevelopment projects, and the urban renewal authorities projects, the potential land supply for the whole year is expected to have a capacity of providing about 16,500 units. The Secretary for Development will later announce the details of the land sale program for the next financial year. The construction of Kwu Tung North Fan Lang North New Development Areas (NDAs) is making good progress. The intake for the first batch of public housing in Kwu Tung North is expected to take place in 2021, 1 year earlier than originally planned. Private residential sites in the area will be tendered gradually. The 12 hectares of private land involved in the first phase of the works for Hong Shui Kiu Ha Chun NDA has been resumed as scheduled. Site formation and infrastructure works are underway. As for the Yuen Long self-development, we are going through the statutory planning process. The first batch of public housing units will be completed in 2028. We will seek funding approval from the LegCo for studies related to the New Territories North NDA within this legislative session. These studies will commence shortly afterwards. The first 2 parcels of housing land under the Tung Shung East reclamation works were handed over to the Hong Kong Housing Authority for public housing developments last year. The first intake for about 10,000 public housing units will take place in 2024. We estimate that in the NDA projects and other government and private development projects under planning, there is a total of over 860 hectares of brownfield sites in the new territories, which can gradually be redeveloped for housing and other land uses. Over the past few years, we have identified 210 sites with potential for housing development. Rezoning has been completed or commenced for 70% of them. It is estimated that about 40% of the public housing units to be completed in the next 10 years will come from the rezoned sites. We are examining the feasibility of rezoning 5 commercial sites in Kowloon East for residential use, taking into account the latest economic situation and market response. If confirmed feasible, we plan to initiate the relevant statutory town planning procedure this year. A total of about 5,800 private housing units can be provided according to our preliminary estimation. The Mass Transit Railway Corporation Limited and government departments are pressing ahead with the development of the Siu Ho Wan depot site. Our target is to have the first batch of about 6,000 public and private housing units gradually ready for intake in around 2030. Upon completion of the whole project, about 20,000 units will be provided, about half of which will be public housing units. We plan to conduct later this year district consultations on 2 single-site multiple-use projects, namely the redevelopment of Tuen Mun Clinic and the joint-use building for community facilities at Shan Mei Street in Sha Tin. Besides, we will apply funding from the electrical as soon as possible for 3 other projects, namely one at the former Anderson Road quarry site, one in Chengguan Old Town Center, and the other one near Shengwan Fire Station. In addition, we are reviewing about 40 government, institution, or community sites with joint use potential. We hope to put forward concrete proposals for these sites this year, including developing multipurpose public facility buildings. The DVB has set up the Development Projects Facilitation Office to facilitate the processing of planning, lease modification, and building plan applications, etc., for private residential development projects with a yield of 500 flags or more by enhancing coordination among the departments involved. The DVB and the Lands Department will introduce a pilot scheme for charging land premium at standard rates in this quarter to encourage redevelopment of industrial buildings. Housing supply. We have identified land for the provision of 316,000 public housing units in the coming 10 years. With the redevelopment of the Hong Kong Housing Authority's factory estates, the number of public housing units may see further increase. It is estimated that the total public housing production in the 5-year period from 2020 to 21 is about 101,400 units, comprising over 70,000 public rental housing and green form subsidized home ownership scheme units, and over 30,000 other subsidized sales units. On private housing, it is estimated that the completion of private residential units will average over 18,000 units annually in the 5 years from 2021, representing an increase of about 5% over the annual average of the past 5 years. The government has already identified land for the provision of about 14,000 transitional housing units by the end of 2023. Intake of residents for over 1,100 units has taken place. Projects involving about 9,800 units have been launched. The $5 billion funding scheme to support transitional housing projects has approved projects involving over $2.6 billion, and the government will inject another $3.3 billion this year. The government is also seeking funding from the Community Care Fund to subsidize NGOs as a pilot scheme to rent suitable rooms in hotels and guest houses with relatively low occupancy rates for use as transitional housing. Green City. The government strives to achieve carbon neutrality before 2050 and will update the Hong Kong's Climate Action Plan in the middle of this year to set out more proactive strategies and measures to reduce carbon emissions. We are setting an example by implementing the green energy targets to boost the overall energy performance of the government by 6% by 2024 to 25. Concurrently, the government will continue to promote new energy transportation so as to further reduce roadside air pollution. The government has all along been promoting the replacement of conventional fuel-propelled private cars, PCs, with electric vehicles, EVs. Last year, 1 out of 8 new PCs is EV. In the past 10 years, the number of EVs increased from 184 to over 18,500, with the total number of electric private cars, EPCs, accounting for 2.7% of the total number of PCs in Hong Kong. The one-for-one replacement scheme provides a higher first registration tax concession for owners who buy a new EPC and scrap their eligible old PC, subject to a cap of $250,000. Since its launch, 90% of the owners of first registered EPCs have benefited from the scheme. The first registration tax concession for general EPCs is $97,500. The government launched the $2 billion EV charging at home subsidy scheme in October last year. It is expected that about 60,000 parking spaces in existing private residential buildings will be provided with EV charging enabling infrastructure under the scheme in 3 years. Since the introduction of this scheme, applications involving more than 50,000 parking spaces have been received. Last year, the government allocated an additional funding of $800 million to the New Energy Transport Fund and expanded its funding scope to cover additional types of electric commercial vehicles. As at the end of last year, the amount of subsidy granted under the fund was $154 million, covering nearly 200 projects on electric and hybrid commercial vehicles, as well as conventional buses and ferries. Moreover, the government earmarked $80 million for green public light bus (PLB) operators to embark on a pilot scheme on electric PLBs from 2023. Meanwhile, the government has also earmarked $350 million to provide subsidies for ferry operators to conduct trials on electric ferries serving in-harbour routes of the Victoria Harbour from 2023. The Environment Bureau will announce next month Hong Kong's first roadmap on the popularization of EVs, setting out long-term policy objectives and plans on the use of EVs and the associated supporting facilities. The key measures include ceasing the new registration of fuel-propelled PCs in 2035 or earlier, expanding the EV charging network and promoting its marketization, training of EV technical and maintenance practitioners, and formulating a producer responsibility scheme for retired EV batteries. The government will also take the lead to use more EVs. Improve air quality. To further improve air quality, the government has implemented an ex gratia payment scheme of $7.1 billion to phase out about 40,000 Euro 4 diesel commercial vehicles by the end of 2027. The government will finish updating the Clean Air Plan for Hong Kong by the middle of this year to set out long-term goals and devise measures to further improve air quality. Relieve traffic congestion. The number of PCs has been on the rise. Traffic congestion has been aggravating. The FRT and the vehicle license fee for PCs have not been adjusted since 2011 and 1991, respectively. I propose increasing the rates of each tax band for the FRT for PCs, including EPCs, by 15% and the vehicle license fee by 30%. The above-mentioned adjustments have been gazetted for taking effect today. Other types of vehicles are not affected. The maximum FRT concession for EPCs under the one-for-one replacement scheme will be raised correspondingly to $287,500, while FRT concession cap for general EPCs will remain unchanged. The Transport Department will also continue the studies on congestion charging and the electronic road pricing pilot scheme in Central, with the aim of optimizing the use of road space and relieving traffic congestion. Decarbonize and reduce waste. In addition to the resources earmarked in previous budgets, I will set aside an extra $1 billion for more than 80 projects to install additional small-scale renewable energy systems at government buildings and infrastructure. I will also set aside $150 million to conduct energy audits and install energy-saving appliances free of charge for NGOs subvented by the Social Welfare Department. In addition, the Green Tech Fund, set up with an allocation of $200 million by the government, has just closed the first round of applications. The result is expected to be announced in the middle of this year. All these measures can help Hong Kong advance towards its carbon neutrality target and will also create jobs. The government will inject an additional funding of $1 billion to the recycling fund and extend the application period to 2027 so as to render continuous support to the trade, particularly the SMEs, in enhancing its operational capabilities and efficiency as well as coping with the latest needs of both the local and non-local markets. It is expected that more than 1,000 businesses will benefit from the measure. Quality living. Apart from large-scale infrastructure projects, I also care about developing a quality city for our citizens, including enhancing the facilities in the highly popular country parks, hiking trails, recreational facilities, and harborfront facilities. I will allocate more resources to the relevant projects. I will set aside $500 million to carry out enhancement works on facilities in some country parks, such as providing recreational elements like additional lookout points, treetop adventure, and glamping sites, improving toilet facilities and barbecue and picnic sites, and revitalizing some wartime relics by converting them into open museums so as to enrich visitors' experience and enjoyment at the countryside. The new facilities will adopt low-carbon and green design that integrates with its natural surroundings. The needs of all age groups and people with or without physical disabilities will be catered for. The new facilities will be rolled out gradually in the coming 2 to 3 years for public enjoyment. Meanwhile, I have also earmarked $55 million for the Tourism Commission to work with the AFCD to take forward the second phase of the enhancement program for 10 popular hiking trails in country parks that have potential for tourism in the coming 5 years with a view to enriching leisure experience of the public and visitors. Upgrade recreational facilities. The government has launched a 5-year plan to modify more than 170 public play spaces managed by the LCSD across the territory since 2019, with a view to providing children's play equipment which incorporates more elements of fun, creativity, and challenge. To cater for people's diverse needs for fitness equipment, the LCSD will install some novel outdoor fitness equipment as appropriate when constructing new parks or renovating existing ones, such as the Yatming Road Park in North District, which is near completion, and the Butterfly Beach Park in Tuen Mun. Football has long been one of the most popular sports. The Kai Tak Sports Park, scheduled for completion in 2023, will provide, among others, 2 main stadiums for hosting both international and local football matches. The 5-year plan for sports and recreational facilities also includes the construction or reconstruction of 12 football pitches, including the redevelopment of Yuen Long Stadium. I will earmark $318 million to implement a 5-year plan for upgrading over 70 football pitches under the management of LCSD, including substantially increasing the number of 5A-side football pitches meeting international standards, exploring the possibility of expanding the existing football pitches into standard 11-a-side turf pitches, and expediting the replacement of artificial turf on football pitches. Relevant national sports association and affiliates, district football groups, schools, and other organizations with more up-to-standard football pitches to organize football training programs and football matches in the future. The general public, in particular young people, will have more opportunities to play football regularly and develop their potential, thereby contributing to the long-term development of football in Hong Kong. Enhance harborfront. I have earlier earmarked a total of $6.5 billion for harborfront enhancement. We have completed 6 kilometers of harborfront promenades over the past 3 years or so for public enjoyment. The 20-kilometer-plus Victoria Harbourfront promenades have now become popular leisure sports. This year, we will seek funding from the Legislative Council for commencing the construction works of 2 major projects, namely the boardwalk underneath the Island Eastern Corridor and the Harbourfront Park at Eastern Street North in Sai Ying Pun. An incremental approach will continue to be adopted so that the harborfront sites can be opened as early as possible for public enjoyment. Strengthening healthcare system, healthcare facilities, and manpower. The Hospital Authority will press ahead with the implementation of the first 10-year Hospital Development Plan, HDP, and the planning of the second 10-year HDP. The HA will review the design of hospital projects under the 2 10-year HDPs, taking into account the experience in combating COVID-19 and incorporates required provisions for 2 to 3 general wards in each selected hospital, so that they can be readily converted into Tier 2 isolation wards when the need arises. To strengthen professional healthcare training, around $1.9 billion has been allocated to the University of Hong Kong, the Chinese University of Hong Kong, and the Hong Kong Polytechnic University in the past 2 financial years for carrying out short-term renovation works and facility enhancements, as well as studies and medium and long-term works projects to increase their teaching facilities. The governments will continue to work with the universities to upgrade and increase healthcare-related teaching facilities. Healthcare workers play a pivotal role in our fight against the epidemic. The last budget earmarked funding to support the HA in providing sufficient manpower for the public healthcare system and easing the pressure on healthcare workers. The measures are being taken forward. Primary healthcare. Following the commencement of service of the first District Health Center, DHC, in Kuai-Ching District, I earmarked $650 million recurrence expenditure for setting up DHCs in 6 other districts last year, 2 of them in Shamshui-Po and Wangdai targets to commence operation within the coming 2 years. Last year, I also allocated about $600 million for setting up DHC expresses in the remaining 11 districts, which are expected to commence service progressively within this year. Developments of Chinese medicine. The government will award the service deed for the Chinese Medicine Hospital in Chengguano in the middle of this year, and construction works are expected to be completed in 2025. Since last year, the government has also allocated more resources to the 18 Chinese medicine clinics cum training and research centers, with a view to continuously enhancing the remuneration package of and training for Chinese medicine practitioners. Moreover, the government promotes the development of Chinese medicine in Hong Kong through a dedicated fund of $500 million. Mental health services. The government will provide additional recurrence funding of around $147 million to enhance child and adolescent psychiatric, community psychiatric, and psychogeriatric services of the HA and support the enhanced service of Kwai Chung Hospital upon its redevelopment. It was earlier announced that a sum of $300 million will be used for strengthening support for people in need in the community, as well as enhancing public awareness of the importance of mental health. Caring and inclusion. The government will provide an extra 1,500 subsidized elderly home care services places this year, involving an annual expenditure of about $150 million. The government is also taking forward 66 new projects, providing about 8,800 residential care places and about 2,800 subsidized daycare service places for the elderly in the coming few years. The government has substantially increased the resources allocated to rehabilitation services in recent years. The number of places for on-site preschool rehabilitation services has been increased by 1,000 to 8,000 in the current school year, and is expected to further increase to 10,000 in 2022-23 school year. The Labour Department launched the Racial Diversity Employment Program last year to enable NGOs to provide one-stop employment services for ethnic minority job seekers through a case management approach. Over 500 ethnic minority job seekers are expected to participate in the first 2 years of the program. The revenue for the lotteries fund has dropped substantially due to the epidemic. I will make an injection of $1.1 billion to ensure that development projects in respect of much-needed social welfare services premises, particularly major facilities for elderly and rehabilitation services, can proceed as scheduled, and that the feasibility studies and detailed design work for such projects will not be affected. Public finance. Deficits budget. As an open economy with a relatively narrow tax base, Hong Kong's government's revenue is susceptible to changes in the economic environment. The aging population also poses pressure on public expenditure. Though I have great confidence in Hong Kong's fundamental strengths and long-term prospects, we must, in the face of an economic downturn and the aforesaid challenges, exercise extra prudence in managing public finance. Our fiscal reserves are the fruits of the economic development of Hong Kong and the hard work of our people over the years. They enable us to adopt a deficit budget amid the prevailing economic downturn and launch counter-cyclical measures to support the economy and relieve people's burden. In the past year, we have increased government expenditure substantially to combat the epidemic and roll out relief measures, which resulted in our fiscal reserves dropping sharply in 2 years from the equivalent of 23 months of government expenditure to 13 months. Although I forecast an improvement in revenue for the next financial year, I expect that the fiscal deficit will be $101.6 billion, accounting for 3.6% of our GDP due to the counter-cyclical fiscal measures and the continued increase in recurrent expenditure. In other words, Hong Kong will record a deficit for a number of years after achieving a surplus for 15 years. As shown in the medium-range forecast, MRF, the operating account is projected to be in deficit for 5 consecutive years. The operating deficits for 2021-22 will be more than $140 billion, mainly due to the counter-cyclical measures, while the operating deficits for the remaining 4 years will range from $22.4 billion to $40.7 billion. The consolidated accounts is also expected to record a deficit for 4 consecutive years. The above forecast has not yet taken into account any tax rebate or relief measure that the government may implement in the future. The deficits are mainly caused by the fact that the rise in government expenditure is outpacing the increase in government revenue, especially in terms of recurrent expenditure. Recurrent expenditure of the government increased from about $150 billion in 1997 to 98 to about $470 billion in 2020 to 21, representing a more than threefold increase. The significant rise in government expenditure in recent years is for enhancing services or investing for the future. However, as emphasized in my last budget, government expenditure should enter a consolidation period. The long-term financial commitments should also be commensurate with the increase in revenue. As a number of measures announced in this year's budget will have a bearing on the new financial year and the MRF, I would like to offer some explanations here to members and the public. To optimize the use of fiscal reserves for seeking a better return to meet future needs, the government set up the Future Fund in 2016 to make longer-term investments for a period of 10 years. The investment return of the fund forms an integral part of public financial resources and has accumulated a return amounting to nearly $100 billion. While the government has all along been disclosing the rates of return of the Future Fund, the investment return yet to be brought back has not been reflected under the cash-based government accounts. Starting from 2021 to 2022, I will reflect the cumulative investment return of the fund in operating accounts on a progressive basis, with $25 billion brought back in the first year.
The 2021 to 22 budget has also included $23 billion brought back from the housing reserve and the annual proceeds of about $35 billion from the expansion of the government green bond program as mentioned earlier. The sums raised under the government green bond program will provide funding for green projects under the Capital Works Reserve Fund, but will not be used to finance operating expenditure and hence will not undermine public finance discipline. The issuance of bonds cannot bolster our real financial strength as it ultimately requires the repayment of principal and interest. Nonetheless, the issuance of additional green bonds for financing eligible projects can definitely relieve the government's fiscal pressure arising from the need to use existing resources to meet capital expenditure. This is a reasonable and appropriate approach in the light of the current low interest rate environment and is also conducive to the development of Hong Kong's bond market. The above measures of bringing back the Future Fund's investment return and the housing reserve and issuing additional green bonds will ensure that our fiscal reserves can be maintained at a relatively robust level despite fiscal or deficit budgets in the next few years. They would enhance confidence in Hong Kong's fiscal strength and is conducive to maintaining our financial stability. However, in the long run, the key to maintaining healthy public finances is to follow the principle of keeping expenditure within the limits of revenue and ensure that the growth of expenditure is commensurate with economic growth. In the face of the challenges of fiscal deficits, we should not only reduce expenditure but also increase revenue. Reduce expenditure. This year's budget will continue to roll out a series of measures for supporting individuals and businesses. Last year, Hong Kong's economy was battered by the epidemic, and all sectors of the community were generally affected in varying degrees, particularly the grassroots. Despite the fiscal deficit, I've decided not to reduce our spending in areas relating to people's livelihood, especially resources allocated to the three policy areas of education, social welfare, and healthcare, in order to safeguard people's livelihood and maintain public confidence. In 2021 to 22, the recurrent funding for these three policy areas amounts to $302.3 billion in total, accounting for 58% of the government's total estimated recurrent expenditure and representing an increase of 45% over the provision of $208.2 billion in 2017 to 18. The government will set an example by cutting expenditure to strengthen fiscal discipline. In 2021 to 22, we will have zero growth in the civil service establishment. Besides, the government will implement an expenditure reduction program by requiring all policy bureaus and departments to reduce expenditure without affecting livelihood-related spending. The goal is to trim recurrent expenditure by 1% in 2022 to 23. The estimated savings will be about $3.9 billion. While it seems not too difficult to achieve the 1% cut in recurrent expenditure, there's limited room for curbing expenses relating to personnel emoluments, which account for about 60% of recurrent expenditure of government departments. We can only achieve the target mainly through savings from the remaining 40% of recurrent expenditure, including major items such as general expenses and subventions. All departments have to undertake critical review, adjust priorities, and enhance efficiency in order to achieve the savings target without affecting day-to-day operation and public services they provide. Many a little makes a mickle. Increase revenue. As I have pointed out in my budget last year, Hong Kong needs to maintain the development and vibrancy of our economy and identify new areas of growth with a view to increasing our revenue. I've just elaborated on the long-term positioning of Hong Kong's economy and the strategies for the development of our major sectors, which will help increase government revenue on the long run. Besides, I mentioned last year that we need to consider seeking new revenue sources or revising tax rates and reducing one-off relief measures progressively. Though raising tax rates can increase revenue on the short run, the choice must be made carefully. Having duly considered the impacts on the securities market and our international competitiveness, we have decided to introduce a bill to raise the rate of stamp duty on stock transfers from the current 0.1% to 0.13% of the consideration or value of each transaction payable by buyers and sellers respectively. The government will continue to spare no effort in introducing measures to facilitate the development of the securities market to take our financial services sector to the next level. As businesses and individuals are generally under considerable financial pressure amid the prevailing economic environment and the epidemic, I consider that it is not the appropriate time to revise the rates of profits tax and salaries tax, which are our major sources of revenue. Nevertheless, we will keep in view the situation and make adjustments at the appropriate time. During budget consultations, I received many proposals to introduce new taxes. If we do so, we have to carefully examine the proposals, take all factors into account, and earnestly listen to views of various sectors. Fighting the epidemic and reviving the economy are our current priorities. This is not the time to introduce new taxes. Nevertheless, we will carry out related research and make preparation to facilitate in-depth discussions at a suitable time and forge consensus before we introduce new taxes to increase revenue. International Tax Cooperation. The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development is drawing up new proposals to address base erosion and profit shifting, or BEPS 2.0, which include the introduction of a global minimum tax rate and a digital tax. In mid-2020, the advisory panel on BEPS 2.0 commenced work on assessing the impact of the proposals on Hong Kong. Meanwhile, the government has been collecting views from stakeholders in the business sector. Taking into account the preliminary views of the advisory panel, I would like to outline the direction of the government's response measures so that the business sector can have a better grasp of the issue and make early preparation. First, as an international financial and business center, Hong Kong will actively implement the BEPS 2.0 proposals according to international consensus. Second, as most of the rules under BEPS 2.0 are only applicable to large multinational corporations, we will minimize the impacts on local SMEs where possible when drawing up the response measures and strive to maintain the simplicity, certainty, and fairness of our tax regime, which are our key advantages. Third, while safeguarding Hong Kong's taxing rights, we will at the same time minimize the compliance burden on affected corporations. Fourth, we will keep up our efforts in improving Hong Kong's business environment and enhancing our competitiveness to attract multinational corporations to invest and operate in Hong Kong. Once the OECD has finalized the proposal, the advisory panel will put forward its recommendations on the specific response measures in its report to me. Rating system. The rating system in Hong Kong has not undergone any major change since 1995. To ensure that our rating system could keep pace with the times, I have requested the FSTB and the Rating and Evaluation Department to review whether there's any room for improvement in respect of the rating system. We will review the case for introducing a progressive element to the rating system and therefore providing rates concession to owner-occupied properties on a regular basis. Furthermore, we will consider shifting the primary liability for rates payment from the occupier to the owner of a property to reflect that the ultimate responsibility with regard to a property should rest with its owner. The government will consult the relevant electoral panel on whether and how to revise the rating system. Revised estimates for 2020 to 21. The 2020 to 21 revised estimates on government revenue is 543.5 billion, lower than the original estimate by 5.1% or 29 billion. This is mainly due to the lower than expected revenue from land premium. Revenue from land premium is 87 billion, substantially lower than the original estimate by 31 billion, mainly due to the deferment of the disposal timetable of a high-value commercial site in the year. Revenue from profits tax is 131 billion, comparable to the original estimate. Meanwhile, revenue from salaries tax is 72 billion, which is 12.1 billion higher than the original estimate. This is mainly because some tax revenue that should be received in previous year could only be collected this year as a result of the deferred tax assessment cycle. Stamp duty revenue is 79 billion, which is 4 billion higher than the original estimate. This is mainly due to the hectic trading in the stock market. As for government expenditure, the revised estimate is 820.4 billion, 12.2% or 89.3 billion higher than the original estimate. This is mainly because of the need to make injections into the AEF and meet expenditure on other helping measures. At the same time, expenditure on public works project was 7.1 billion lower than the original estimate. All in all, I forecast a deficit of 257.6 billion for 2020 to 21. Fiscal reserves are expected to be 902.7 billion by the 31st of March 2021. The civil service establishment increased by 6,082 posts in this financial year, representing a growth of 3.2%. The increase in the establishment is mainly due to the implementation of new policies and measures by the government and the need to cope with additional workload. Estimates for 2021 to 22. The major policy initiatives announced in the 2020 policy address involve an operating expenditure of about 18.3 billion and a capital expenditure of 2.1 billion. I will ensure that adequate resources are provided to fully support the launch of these initiatives. Total government revenue for 2021 to 22 is estimated to be 591.1 billion. Earnings and profits tax is estimated to be 200.7 billion, decreasing by 6.1% compared with the revised estimate for 2020 to 21. Having regard to the land sale program and the land supply target of the coming year, revenue from land premium is estimated to be 97.6 billion, increasing by 12.1% compared with the revised estimate for 2020 to 21. Revenue from stamp duties is estimated to be 92 billion, increasing by 16.5% compared with the revised estimate for 2020 to 21. The current term government has launched a series of measures to improve people's livelihood. Recurrent expenditure for 2020 to 21 increased by 7.6% compared with the last financial year, while total government expenditure also increased by 35%. Recurrent expenditure for the new financial year will further increase by 9.6%, demonstrating the government's determination to stimulate the economy and ease people's burden. Public expenditure will account for about 25% of GDP on average during the 5-year period up to 2025 to 26 in the MRF. In 2021 to 22, the estimated recurrent expenditure on education, social welfare and healthcare accounts for 58% of government recurrent expenditure, or 302.3 billion. Recurrent expenditure in these three areas recorded a cumulative increase of 53% over the past 5 years. Our target is to have zero growth in the civil service establishment in 2021 to 22. The Civil Service Bureau has encouraged departments to enhance effectiveness through reprioritization, internal redeployment, and streamlining of work processes to cope with the workload. Medium-range forecasts. The MRF projects, mainly from a macro perspective, the revenue and expenditure as well as financial position of the government. From 2022 to 2023 to 2025 to 2024, a real economic growth rate of 3.3% is adopted for the MRF. During the above period, the average annual capital works expenditure will exceed $100 billion, while the growth of recurrent government expenditure ranges from 3.5% and 4.7% per annum. Regarding revenue from land premium, the forecast from 2022 to 2023 onwards is based on the average proportion of revenue from land premium to GDP over the past 15 years, which is 3.6% of GDP. I also assume that the growth rate of revenue from profit tax and other taxes will correspond to the economic growth rate in the next few years. In addition, the MRF reflects the bringing back of the housing reserve and the investment return of the future fund and the proceeds of the government green bond program. Based on the above assumptions and arrangements, I forecast an annual deficit in the operating account in each of the coming 5 financial years, as well as a deficit in the capital account from 2022 to 2023 to 2024 to 2025. The estimated deficit in the operating account in 2021 to 22 is mainly due to the expenditure arising from the one-off relief measures announced in this budget and some of the relief measures announced last year. The forecast deficit in the operating account in the following 4 years is attributed to the fact that recurrent expenditure will be higher than revenue receipts. The above forecast has not taken into account any tax rebate or relief measure that the government may implement over these 4 years. Fiscal reserves are estimated at 775.8 billion by the end of March 2026, representing 22% of GDP or equivalent to 12 months of government expenditure. Mr. President, members, over the past 2 years, Hong Kong has suffered successive setbacks, and now we have to fight the epidemic and ride out the economic difficulties. Life has not been easy for us all. I often chat with people, especially during the preparation for the budget. I know how difficult it is to earn a living during the economic downturn. I can feel their pain. This is why, despite a record high fiscal deficit in 2020 to 21, I once again propose a budget involving a deficit of over $100 billion. I do so after careful consideration, as the counter-cyclical measures are necessary for stabilizing the economy and alleviating people's burden. At the same time, I'm mindful of the need to expand government revenue and create fiscal space in a prudent manner. In spite of the pressure we now face, looking back, we have walked all the way through thick and thin. However harsh life might have been, Hong Kong remains the home that we treasure. Home is not where we find perfection. It is where we stay together as a family, sharing mutual care, acceptance, and support. This unprecedented pandemic reminds us that we are all in the same boat. Deep-seated conflicts cannot be resolved instantly, nor can wounds be healed overnight. Given time, even the tightest knot can be untied. The economy may move in a cycle, but there is always a way to prosperity. We have overcome many challenges and always come out stronger. Let us be steadfast and ride out the storm. Together, we will build a better Hong Kong. Thank you, President. Thank you. I now propose the question to you that the above-mentioned bill be read the second time. In accordance with the rules of procedure, the second reading debate is adjourned and the estimates are referred to the Finance Committee for examination before the debate on the bill resumes.